So, in our previous discussion, we have explained the conceptual basis for spatial information. And now, in this part of our discussion, we would highlight the space related representations and highlight the spatial interactions that is so important in the context of learning about spatial information science. Spatial information is essentially a space oriented interactions. So, what has powered the spatial information in recent times? The obvious answer to it is the advent of and popularization of digital technology. There is no doubt about it. You all would have noticed that in the recent times, spatial informations has penetrated and found presence in every aspect of our life. You might have also observed that sources of information has changed. It has become more in digital mode. The volume of information has also increased manifold. The access to information has also improved significantly. And there is also quick updation of information also. All this is possible only because now we are dealing the information in digital format. One reason which is more implied here is that the information now is in digital mode, and despite of increase in volume, this is another significant fact about the information in digital mode, that now we have a lot more information which is increasing the volume, which is in some instances we need greater storage capacity of our system. So as I am saying that despite of increase in volume, the popularization and spread of digital technology has revolutionized the information and spatial information. That is why in modern time is also known, we are also calling it as information age. We all know that space is critical for human existence, not only for our existence, but our survival as well as our future life over the earth. Space is premium because of many reasons, but basic reason is large population, which means that land-man ratio is declining, and for all kind of activities for human survival and living, each one of us require geographic space. So space is important, very important, and how the space is used or interacted upon is essential for our survival or for sustainability in larger context. There is no doubt that we have increased competition here. You bring in the discussion, within the discussion of the concept of overpopulation, underpopulation, optimum population. All of them are very crucial and relevant in terms of our learning on space, regarding the space. These term has meaning more with effective and appropriate utilization of resources rather than abundance of resources. I am referring to the concept of overpopulation, underpopulation and optimum population. I mean the technology, expertise or higher level of development, and all this has basically have greater spatial dimension. So space is very important and very critical. And I would say all human activities, they require knowledge about the earth. And so spatial information is very important, significant and critical. Space is integral to human over the earth's surface, and I want to draw your attention to some everyday basic queries which we commonly deal with, but they are very definitely having spatial orientation. Like, where is Aligarh? This is basic, but space has great relevance here. If you are in Kolkata, you may say that it is near Delhi, west of Kolkata. If you are in Jaipur, you would say that it is east of Delhi. Similarly, It is northeast of Bhopal, but south of Dehradun. So that way you see this space orientation in everyday life is very important and critical, and every day we deal with this kind of spatial information. Another, for example, soil characteristic of Aligarh. Now, here it requires knowledge of many other attribute information, characteristic feature of the location, like drainage, the kind of parent rock which forms the soil, the geology of the location, climate of the location, etc. etc. To explain the physical setting of any location, another question I would pose as like rural urban population. This requires response in relation with social setup of that particular location. But again, it has specific link to the specific location. Another question about any commercial establishment requires again knowledge of not only social attributes but more significantly economic attributes also of that particular space in which the context the question is being posed. The last question, which is about travel path, is most common, but here again it requires spatial knowledge. Not only spatial knowledge but also individual perspective, which is very critical as there can be many alternatives. So which is suited to the respondent would be applicable. Now here I want to bring into the discussion the perception. You see, the perception, it actually culminate into the mapping of any specific location or representing the ground reality of any location. You need to also consider the perception of the individual who is portraying the ground reality. And in that context, when we are talking about spatial information, this perception has great role in depicting the ground realities. So in this context of identifying the path, when we talk about perspective between two places, there can be one route which can be quicker, another may be cheaper in terms of travel cost, another can be convenient or smooth to move on that kind of path or road. One may also pass through a market, so you can do some other activity also. So here I would say the behavioral attitude or the perception of the individual who is answering to any specific spatial question may be very dominant. Now you would have a very fair idea that how all these questions, they require knowledge of space, which to my mind, and you might also agree with me, that it is important, critical, and has relevance to each one of us. So space-oriented queries require spatial knowledge, which we process naturally also. This we learn through our experience of the place and understanding about the different real-world phenomena. Each spatial query answer about the phenomena, that is answer to what spatial query regarding the location of phenomena. Answer where, the spatial query regarding characteristic of features of phenomena. The significance is related with spatial interaction of the phenomena. Same with the spatial query regarding development or changes, transformation of phenomena. All in all, again I would say spatial knowledge is important for all of us. And our survival over the Earth's surface is dependent on knowing about the space, about specific locations, which might be beneficial or which might not be so good for us, and we act and behave accordingly. In spatial information, individual or collective perspective is even more important. As I have said earlier also, here, how anyone perceives and interacts with the geographic space is important. Not only that, how the interaction is with its resources and its people, etc. These interaction explains the processes active on that space. That brings to highlight spatial distribution. It's not all about maps, but I would say it is more about basic space knowledge. And I am trying to sensitize you to understand this basic space knowledge and inculcate in your discipline. So I would say that these interactions, these spatial interactions, are greatly varied over the space. That is why we refer to term diversity. It is essentially the outcome of geographic space, which are said to be a social creations. I mean space-specific interaction here. So different individual groups, societies, and even nations, they have different perspective for space. I tried to explain it in my previous part of this discussion. And this difference in perspective is evident in their response to space, their activity, and also their utilization of space. It all depends on individual's perspective or collective perspective of group of people. The perspective can have dominant economic benefit out of the space, or may aspire for development or emphasis for specific activity, or some may go for aesthetic beauty, may consider of improving and maintaining the environment, etc., regarding the space. I would say that here we also need to think about the man-nature space interaction, which is greatly dependent on this perspective of human being. I am building this argument that how the human being over the earth's surface, they are utilizing the space. And in that context, space knowledge is very important. Now we highlight the evolvement and progress of spatial outlook. Space-oriented knowledge is because of human inquisitive nature. It might have begun with any individual describing his spatial assessment of any location, the characteristics of these locations observed by that individual. But here, his or her perspective would be very important. His observation would be dependent on it, and his description would also be based on it. But then others, when they would observe the same location, the same phenomena, then there are two possibilities. One, they may agree with it, or another, they may disagree with the previous individual. Now here, if they are agreeing, then both of them, they might have the same perspective. And if they disagree, then there would be some conflict between the perspective of these individuals. So this is why the spatial information gained significance in human interactions, because we try to explain newer areas, newer phenomena, and that way we spread the spatial information among ourselves. So the crux of the matter is that space matters. All the time we pose question or answer to what, where, why, when, how, etc., etc. And all the time we interact in such a way that space is central to our activities and discussions. We have seen in the previous discussion of ours, where I have highlighted that how in everyday discussions we have space in our discussion all the time. Now, I would like to share one very interesting case study. And the background of it, I would say that spotlight shine brightly on the use of maps, charts, and data that helped us recently to understand the COVID-19 pandemic. It has quite literally been a very vital moment for geography as well as cartography, the mapping technique, as they emphasize a lot on space. You just recall the 2-3 year back the period where when this pandemic was spreading, we were following the geographic space also. I am trying to link these two aspects. Not that maps were not vital visual analytical tool before, but they had taken center stage during this crisis situation. And of course, examining the role of geography, I mean this geographic space, cartography, I mean the mapping of geographic space, in this contemporary infectious disease epidemiology has also meant looking at the past for examples. There has definitely been something in 2020s as inevitably the story of Dr. John Snow, which I am trying to highlight today. It's a very conventional, traditional example, but after 200 years, still we are referring to the use of space, how a medical practitioner used the geographic space, we are referring to it. The story of Dr. John Snow and his map of cholera showing the outbreak in Soho, London in 1854 has frequently been recounted. Just to give the significance and importance of space, I offer a very interesting but classical example of space-oriented analysis by John Snow, who was by profession a physician and epidemiologist. The bottom line to Dr. John Snow's map and his analysis of space, he emphasized on concluding with that space matters. Space related interaction with human being, they also matters, and geography also matters. So just to give you a brief idea, if you are not familiar with the John Snow's study, I would say that the John Snow spatial exercise is about assessing spatial interactions. He in 19th century unknowingly but very emphatically argued that space matters, interaction matters, and geography matters. The example is about cholera outbreak in 19th century in the city of London, as I have said earlier also. In present day, similar example can be traced on almost daily basis, and that is why I am trying to highlight this issue. Like as I have said, during COVID period, if you just compare the John Snow's study, during COVID period, in our country, we also had one Bhilwara model, one Dharavi model. It was debated and discussed a lot during that particular period. And both of them, during the COVID period, Bhilwara model and the Dharavi model, both of them, they had a great spatial orientation where we looked into the COVID spread and how we can contain them. There, the measures which have been taken were space oriented, and that is why they are known as Bhilwara model and Dharavi model. So coming back to the John Snow's example, actually Dr. John Snow was getting cholera infected patients from different locations in London. And Dr. John Snow thought that cholera is a waterborne disease. Now, at that time, it was not conclusively known to all of us that cholera is a waterborne disease. And at that time, in city of London, water was drawn through hand pumps. Now, again, it is interesting. We are talking about 18th century. So he systematically pull out the handles of hand pumps at specific locations one by one, and observed that with the specific removal of the handle of hand pumps, which were the pumps were drawing contaminated water and were the cause of spread of disease. And specific hand pumps were the real reason cause of contaminated water distribution and use. But during his assessment and analysis, Dr. John Snow made spatial inquiry. On this specific spatial team was not confined only to identify the contaminated water areas. It was just the beginning of spatial investigation and queries, as he was found many spatial anomalies and abnormalities. Now, what are the spatial anomalies and abnormalities? You see, anomalies and abnormalities, they differ from the general trend. And I am trying to highlight this aspect of Dr. John Snow, where he found spatial anomalies and abnormalities, and both of them, they were found because of space related interaction. So these anomalies and abnormalities had spatial orientation, like the distance, the travel path. They were the important factor for the spread of disease. Some areas were not accessible directly, so their contaminated water was not being used. So the cholera incidents were lesser there, and thus they were not infected. Similarly, some areas, despite being close to the infected hand pumps, but the use of water was done differently. And in other case, due to some social reasons, despite of the proximity to the infected hand pump, water was not being used or drawn, and they were drawn from other sources from other areas, and thus again they were not infected. So this way, some areas where no death was observed, the cholera infection was not so dominant there, because it was located in a brewery where they were boiling their water. So all these situations, they were projecting the spatial interaction. This example indicated that spatio-temporal analysis has significance, as it considers both spatial and temporal correlations and make it possible to observe the geographical and temporal distribution of phenomena through visualization of data that contains space and time information. In addition to spatio-temporal modeling, which we have seen in this example, it also enables us to investigate the trends over time, whereas spatial modeling only captures information at a specific point in time. If the risk of disease shows increasing or decreasing trends over time, then the use of spatio-temporal analysis is very important and critical. In addition to the appropriate use of space-time interactions, it can be captured through localized clusters that could be related to emerging environmental risks or consistent errors in the data recording process. All in all, this very crude spatial analysis, but very effective to understand the spatial significance, So space is not the domain of geographers alone, but it is useful for everyone. That's the point which I am trying to make here. And that is why I am encouraging all of you, irrespective of your discipline, think about space, geographic space, and try to bring this spatial dimension into your discipline and try to represent the phenomena which you are analyzing, assessing, or investigating or examining. Bring in this spatial dimension that will add value to your discipline.